Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Simply the West podcast. This great game of ours is sometimes cathartic, sometimes therapeutic, sometimes downright diuretic. But Blake Molly, happy to be back in the saddle with you talking about the Big Ten's better half for a third week in a row as college football gets into full swing here, sir.
Yeah, I mean, as a Husker fan, I'm depressed, but you know what? The rest of the league looks really tough, looks really good. Other than probably the bottom two or three teams in the league. But a thing that was really surprising this weekend was that the teams went the Big Ten went 12-1. Nebraska being the one team that didn't win, and then there was a conference game. So. Man, it was a tough weekend for Husker fans, but overall it was a great weekend. I think we solidified the top of both conferences to see who's going to really be in Indianapolis come December.
Yeah, we thought it'd be a fun year to prognosticate about this league, and so far it really hasn't disappointed, at least through 2 weeks. Really quick off the top, want to step away from football for just a second. Won't belabor the point, but we are recording this on September 11th, 2019. And, it's days like today, even Memorial Day, 4th of July. My grandpa was always quick to talk to us about Pearl Harbor, in December. That we're able to take a step back and really appreciate the opportunity to get on Skype and YouTube and SoundCloud and screw around and talk about this great game we love. It definitely puts things in perspective when you start seeing the news clips and the memorials like we do today. I was driving to work today, and local fire department had parked one of its giant pumper trucks on a bridge over I-35 and raised the ladder and mounted an American flag on that. So just little things like that, I'll never forget Nebraska's tribute to 9/11 a few days after it happened. Sports are great. They can help us, get through some tough times. But cheers to our country, this great country of ours, and kind of just a remembrance for 9/11 as we kind of get into college football here. It's good to know there's bigger things in life.
Yeah, and speaking of sports, I mean, I remember when George W. went out, pitched the first pitch of the World Series at Yankee Stadium, wearing that big old bulletproof vest. I mean, gives me chills. I remember just looking back on it and seeing highlights and all that stuff. I was, we were seventh grade when it happened, but I still remember. Kiss your loved ones tonight, give them a hug, and just remember that any day could be your last.
Yeah, amen. And we should remember it. We should have the same conversation, God willing, when we do this a year from now. The further away we get from something like that, the more it can maybe get lost, but it shouldn't. That was a big part in our country's history, and thank the Lord for sports and all the good that they do to bring folks together, especially in times of trial like that. So, all right. Well, moving on, we are going to try something a little different this week. Blake and I put together some power rankings for the Big Ten West. So
we're really smart.
We geniuses, yeah. We'll go team by team, kind of break down where each team is at a couple weeks into the season here. But I want to start off actually with a little kind of reflection and a little story. Watched a lot of football over the weekend. I know you did too, Blake, and especially with the Nebraska-Colorado game. I know we were both paying pretty close attention to that. That was one of the bigger games on the slate. A lot of different things you could break down in pretty much any game we watch. And, at the end of the day, football, for as complex as the schemes can be, and some of the minutia can be, maybe on more of a macro level. At its core, football might be the most simple game there is, maybe besides running or wrestling. We have, just a quick story, an au pair living with us this year. Her name's Rafaela. She's from Brazil. she knows nothing about American football. Football to her is football, and she still can't figure out why it's even called football because there's so little kicking compared to pretty much every sporting experience she's ever had in her entire life. So I was trying to explain American football to her. We took her to the Nebraska season opener, and she had a blast. But I asked her, did you have fun? Yeah. Did you have a clue what was going on? No, but it was fun. So I took 22 little pebbles and lined them up and kind of ran her through the positions and plays and how this team needs to go this way and this team needs to go that way. But that got me thinking a little bit. It's complicated. There's a lot of rules to explain. There's a lot of different plays you can run. You look at all the different schemes there are in college football now. To me, that's one of the reasons it's so enjoyable as a sports nut. But at its core, and Blake, you played at a high level in high school and then a little bit in college. I did not. The top of my football career was flag football intramurals at Benedictine College with Blake on my team. Yeah, two-time champions during the middle part of our collegiate stint. But it really comes down to a few moments of impact and beating the guy across from you. And not just that one moment where you have to go execute a block or run a route or go break up a pass and cover the guy across from you. You think of all the things that go into that moment. The off-season workouts, all the practice you put in, all the weight training. These guys now they're in peak physical condition. Every time they choose to have a meal, what they choose to put into their body, all comes to these few moments of impact. And watching a game, whether it's Iowa blowing out Rutgers or Nebraska trading blows with Colorado and finding a way to lose again. It really comes down to a few of those moments, and it's just such a simple, beautiful game. But at the end of the day, the teams that figure it out are the ones who have guys who have that inner mentality and what it takes to just beat the guy across from you and do it over and over. The teams that are playing really well right now have some killers. Wisconsin has some killers. They have guys who have come back with a vengeance this year and have outscored their first two opponents 110-0. They look awesome. Minnesota has been in a couple of dogfights, probably hasn't played very well, but you know what? They've found a way to finish against South Dakota State and against Fresno State. There's some killers on that team. There are some teams who need to identify who their killers are. Illinois is probably going to need to figure that out as its schedule gets tougher getting into Big Ten play. Nebraska definitely needs to figure it out. Iowa probably needs to figure it out as they continue to figure out, okay, what gaps are being filled. But it's been a fun couple of weeks so far, and we will see who the killers are and who's got the killer instinct moving forward here. As really after this week, it's pretty much all Big Ten games from here on out.
Well, and I completely agree with what you look at all the best teams in college football. It usually is the teams that are pushing the other person around the most. Yes, you're going to have some teams that are able to, out-scheme some people and maybe keep a game close. Sure. Be able to, Texas Tech did this a lot. They were not as talented as a lot of people, but because of their scheme, it kept them in the game sometimes. And we're able to beat better teams, overall talented teams. But that's part of the reason why I think those two elements of the scheme and the physicality, it's like high-level chess. I don't know if you knew this, but I played chess growing up. I was in chess club. I'd get up at 6 in the morning and get to school at 6:30 and play from 6:30 to 7:30. And I was pretty good. I took 4th place in the state of Kansas at one point. I went to nationals.
You're the Uncle Rico of Kansas high school chess.
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of the reason why I think I fell in love. One of the reasons why I fell in love with the game on a more intellectual level as I was getting older. Because there's so many things that you can do. And, I just put out a video that goes over some of the schemes and how to do some high-level offensive and defensive play calling. And it's something that we need to talk more about, but also we got to remember that it's just going to be coming down to who's better conditioned, who has more want to, and who doesn't make a mistake. Because we'll talk about for the Nebraska game, missed tackles were really the only reason that kept Nebraska from doing a shutout, maybe allowing just 7 points. That was the only thing that stood in between them scoring 31-7.
That's
That's
simple.
really all it was.
That's simple. So we'll get into what that looks like for every team as we go through our power rankings. That is a hefty beverage you've got there, Blake. Tell us about it.
It is this is called a full-fledged beer from Full-Fledged Brewing. It is called the Council's Kolsch. It is, if I remember correctly, it's about 5.2 ABV. It is nice and smooth. And I got a great story how I met the guy. I was in a car in an Uber, and guy needed a ride, so I let the guy drop in, and he was an owner of a brewery.
Good guy to know.
So he
Never
gave me his
know who you're
card,
gonna
gave me
meet when you're out
$2 off
driving
on a
Uber.
beer. Went down on Sunday, took my kids down to the brewery. It's a nice family place. If you want to go down there, bring your. And so Marshall, shout out to Marshall Redmond. He's a good guy. I'm going to be coming down there, maybe watching some games over the next couple weeks.
Well, now he's got some free advertising to our massive audience here on the Simply the West podcast. Council Bluffs, Iowa, you said that's where it's located. So if you're in Omaha, you do have to cross the river, but worth it. It sounds like.
Yeah, you could bet then on your app. It's right next to it's actually right next to the Horseshoe.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Keeping it local to where I'm currently residing. Keeping it local, keeping it classy. You know, heading into week 3, we're going to see a lot of teams that need to just put in a good day's work at the office this Saturday. And Grainbelt Premium, brewed in New Ulm, Minnesota, known as the Friendly Beer. It's a good day's work beer. Really light, nice, simple. If I'm looking for a good, cheap lager that I can sit and have a few after a long day, I'm turning to Grainbelt, whether it's 20 below out or 100 degrees, anything in between. Just a good, reliable beer brewed right here in Minnesota. With that, let's get into our power rankings. Let's touch on Illinois first, coming in at number 7 in the Big Ten West. Beat UConn 31-23 over the weekend, improved to 2-0. Looked a little more like the Illinois we were maybe expecting after boat racing Akron in week 1. UConn, easily one of the worst, at least lowest rated teams out there that teams in the Big Ten will play in the non-con this year. Actually jumped out to a 13-0 lead before the Illini woke up a little bit, rattled off 24 straight points. Brandon Peters looked good again, the transfer from Michigan. He's had a really nice season for the Lovey Bears, and Lovey Smith. 4 touchdowns for him again, so that continues to be a nice story we'll keep an eye on. 11 a.m. Central on Big Ten Network this Saturday against Eastern Michigan. Like we've talked about before, good chance for the Illini to improve to 3-0 out of the gates, but we would expect them to potentially struggle just given some of their talent deficiencies. Again, they returned a lot of players this year, but probably not as high on them as the other 6 teams in this division as we head into get closer to conference play here.
Yeah, Illinois just needs to prove it. They're just basically in prove it mode at this point. Lovey Bear, he needs to keep on churning out the wins. I know it's Eastern Michigan. They're probably they have been one of the worst programs in Division I football over the last couple of years. I think they were on the upswing. I can't remember how well they did last year. I think they had one upset that was pretty surprising, if I remember correctly. They're lucky that they have Brandon Peters, honestly. That guy is a stud. He can zip it in there. He might be able to keep them in some games. I think the talent level, again, is just a little lower than the rest of the Big Ten West. They're on the upswing. They need to keep up, get to a bowl game, get some extra practices, get some more recruiting going. That's all it is right now. I can't wait to see them in conference play, because that's when we're going to really actually see how good any of these other teams are. I mean, geez, we'll talk about Iowa, but we need to even know how good Iowa is, even though they played in conference, because Rutgers is terrible.
Yeah. We'll see what shakes out. Checking in at number 6, Northwestern. We went back and forth a little bit this week, kind of trying to determine how the sort of middle of the pack in this division shakes out, and ended up putting Northwestern at 6, maybe by default, if nothing else, the fact that they've lost the only game they've played and we just haven't seen them a whole lot yet. But what are you expecting out of the Wildcats after having an early bye, Blake, to lick their wounds and play UNLV this Saturday?
I think this is probably going to be one of the few times that they're actually probably more athletic and have more talent than UNLV has some good skill guys, but overall, I think Northwestern is probably going to have more talent, and they play tough defense. It might be a little bit of a shootout in the first half, just because of that difference. But and maybe UNLV does some trickery or something like that. I mean, Sanchez, the coach at UNLV, he was the coach at Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, so he's going to be trying to get as much publicity as he can. So a win over a Big Ten team will help him a little bit in recruiting. But I trust the Fighting Fitzes. Fitzgerald, great coach. But the biggest thing is TJ. I don't think TJ Green's going to play, and Hunter Johnson did not look that great. But they've had 2 weeks to prepare for this. Hopefully, the QB issues get ironed out.
We'll find out. 2:30 p.m. Central Time on BTN Saturday. Turning to Purdue, this might be the matchup I'm most excited to check out this weekend. Purdue's offense, especially that aerial attack. Elijah Sindelar, Rondale Moore and company really had a good game in week 2. They take on TCU, traditionally a very good defense. Gary Patterson, the coach down there, pretty much a legend for the Horned Frogs. This could be a fun one at 6:30 on BTN Saturday, Balake.
Well, it's kind of interesting to see how good Purdue really is. I mean, they did have that stumble against Nevada. Similar thing to with Nebraska, just some little itty bitty mistakes that compounded on top of each other. They dropped that game out in Nevada. So it'll be really interesting because TCU should probably have the best defense in the Big 12. What does that mean? Who knows?
That's a relative qualified statement there.
And you know what? Gary Patterson, he knows how to take away guys. He might actually be able to take away Rondale Moore. I tend to think that that Purdue actually has enough playmakers to make up that difference. Braum, great play caller. They seem to not be able to run the ball very well. They have a huge running back that's like 250 pounds, and he was rumbling and stumbling in the first game, but they couldn't get him the ball. They couldn't get him going against Vandy. So for whatever reason, hopefully you'll see that. Now, TCU is actually a really, really young team. They were the youngest team in the Big 12 last year. Again, they're still probably the youngest team in the Big 12 again. TCU has K-State transfer Alex Delton out of Hayes, Kansas, and Max Duggan from Council Bluffs, who had an offer from Nebraska as well. And I know Minnesota, PJ Fleck really wanted him really bad. I think Iowa State was also in on the mix there as well. If I remember correctly, he's a 4-star quarterback recruit. He's come in for passing situations. Delton is more of a runner. So look at it for that. They played Arkansas Pine Bluffs. So what does that mean? They won. No big deal. They're not that great. But they're going to fly around. They're very fast. Maybe not quite as big up front. Even Purdue might be able to outsize them a little bit. So it'll be interesting. It is at Purdue. So look on my picks. I am looking at that line, that money line, because it could be only just like a toss them or a little bit like a -3. So hopefully they do better though.
Should be a fun one. All right, I'm going to offer some in-depth analysis on the number 4 team in our first power rankings, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, near and dear to me and Blake's heart. We know we have a lot of Husker fans who have been checking us out in the first couple weeks of this as well. Are you ready to go deep into the analytics here, Blake?
Can I cuss?
Nebraska blew it. They blew it. They had, and it's not the first time it's happened with this group. They had every conceivable way to win that game, and they somehow found a way to lose. It's become a habit. I know it's cliche, but snatching defeat from the jaws of victory seems to be this team's MO. I do think there's a lot of hope that they will get over that yet this season, and I think we can get into that a little more. But until they do it, and it's not them proving it to you or me or even a lot of the teams they're playing, these 18 to 22-year-old kids who have endured this downslide and are now trying to resurrect this program with Scott Frost's leadership, they've got to prove it to themselves. Once they figure out what that feels like to step on somebody's throat and not let up until the final quarter ends, I think it could really snowball. Whether that's winning one of these tight games finally when you take some counter punches like they did in the second half against Colorado, or shoot, you're going out against Northern Illinois this Saturday. It's a night game in Lincoln. Northern Illinois we'll talk about as a good, if not great, MAC team. They're going to be a handful. But if you can jump on them early and really put your foot on the throat for 4 quarters, just to get that confidence, to feel what that tastes like. It's been so long since this team has had that killer instinct. I think it could snowball the right way once they prove they've got it. But until they do, we're going to continue to be pulling our hair out on Saturday evenings into Sundays, wondering how did Nebraska lose that game? And I think we were asking ourselves that this past weekend. Blake doesn't even have any hair left as a 3-decade Husker fan now.
Basically, yeah. That's the reason why I don't have any hair. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm wearing a suit today. Mainly because I'm having a funeral for this game. I mean, I am ready to bury it, get it out of the system. They did just blow it. They're inventing new ways to lose. In my opinion, they were outcoached. Mel Tucker stuck to his plan. They were always trying to get to that jet sweep. But they were running the jet sweep action. If they weren't handing it off, they were doing some other things. Not always successful, but the jet sweep was. But they didn't just keep running the jet sweep, but they brought it out when they needed first downs, and that was the difference. Nebraska kind of didn't really seem to be building off of it. They tried getting the outside zone, outside sweep run play going. They had one time that Maurice Washington broke a tackle that would have been a 5 or 6 yard loss in the backfield that he got, I think it was like 7 or 8 yards. The only time it worked the entire game. Every time they ran a flare screen action, that's basically a bubble screen from the side running back position where they're going out wide, and then they either throw it to him, fake it to this flare screen, and hand off to a running back, or even do a quarterback dive the opposite way. Every time it was at least 5 yards. They didn't run that. That was what was so frustrating when Frost made his comments at the end of the game, was that he said he wanted to have his best run plays. He picked probably the worst run plays, and he didn't give it to his best player in Adrian Martinez. It made me think that, one, Frost doesn't trust Adrian in the red zone to not throw a pick. Number 2, he doesn't trust any of the wide receivers to get open, recognize zone, and sit in the coverage. And number 3, he must have a bad system to figure out which plays were working to come back to, because he picked the 2 worst plays, 2 of the worst plays that got stuffed all game long.
Yeah,
something to think about. And I don't know, there's some reasons for hope, which I think why are you still hopeful for Nebraska to get better?
Well, to your point, the play calling in overtime was definitely a head scratcher. Adrian Martinez has taken a ton of flack through the first couple weeks. He did not have a good game in week 1 against South Alabama. I thought he looked a lot better this past week.
Agreed.
He's talented. That's reason for hope number 1 right there. Is there's still 10 games left in this thing, and you've got a quarterback who's proven not only that he can rebound from tough situations, but that he is very talented and has the gifts both between the ears and on down. That can take you a long way. The defense has been, I don't have any metrics to back this up, but just aesthetically, it has to be one of the top 10 most improved defenses in the country, at least in terms of how they're playing. That team gave up so many yards and so many big plays, not just last year, but even in the couple of years before that. You're seeing less of that. Yes, they got burned a couple of times by Colorado, ultimately cost them the game. That defense was gassed. They were on the field way too much. The offense, especially the way Nebraska runs its entire system, running tempo, running lots of plays, that defense knows it's going to have its handful, and they've always conceded. We might give up some points, but their whole thing is getting pressure on the quarterback, wreaking havoc and getting takeaways. And I think that system has worked pretty well. That defense looked great through 3 quarters against Colorado. And like I said, I think once you get that taste of victory in your mouth, it's like a young shark learning to hunt for the first time. You smell blood, and once you finally taste it, you want to keep going back and eating and feasting again. And I really think that's what we could see happen with this team. So are there some things they've got to figure out? Yes. Outcoached. I was texting with you a little bit. I pushed back on you a little when we were texting over the weekend. Did Mel Tucker make some better decisions than Coach Frost? Absolutely. That flea flicker call was impeccable timing. That really changed the course of momentum in that game. Like I said, overtime, definitely some strange play calling. But when I hear the word outcoach, I think consistently across 4 quarters, one team's really out scheming the other. And I don't think that's what happened.
Yeah, you're right about that. I just think that at the end, Frost didn't stick to a plan.
No, he didn't, and he's got to take his own advice, Blake. What has his mantra been since he showed up in Lincoln? Desire to excel, no fear of failure. And it was one of the most conservative, strange sets of decision making. It's one thing to coach at Central Florida. It's one thing to be under a guru like Chip Kelly. Frost is young too. He's figuring some of this out. If you're looking for another reason for hope, I think that's it right there. He's a competitor. He's a gamer. And what I've always said, and I'll continue to say, in terms of Nebraska's program and the trajectory it's been on, you obviously had decades of success under Bob Devaney, then Tom Osborne, and you kind of went away from that in the firing of Frank Solich. And they've tried everything. They tried the NFLer and Bill Callahan. That didn't work. They tried a defensive hard ass, excuse my language, in Bo Pelini. That didn't work. They went the opposite with a supposedly skilled offensive mind and Mike Riley, who had no control, no accountability over the program. That obviously didn't work. If Scott Frost can't figure this out, I don't know that anybody can, which is exciting that he's there and they're building this thing, but it's also a little bit terrifying. So we're going to have to see where this thing goes. Another good test Saturday. I think it's actually good for this program. They're facing a team that they shouldn't just walk all over like a Bethune-Cookman last year or something like that. There's a sense of urgency there, and I anticipate a night game in Lincoln. They'll come out with their hair on fire, and I think if you beat Northern Illinois by 2 or 3 touchdowns, you're going to be having a lot different conversation a week from now.
Yeah, and Northern Illinois, kind of a little segue to their defense, is a gambling defense similar to what Nebraska has, except not near as big. Very small. Frost called them like fire ants.
Killer bees or fire ants, the swarming defense. They do all kinds of stuff. They stunt, corner blitzes. They're all over the place.
Yeah, they really are. And they're tough. They're tough-minded. Although their defense is really probably designed to beat an offense kind of like the Mike Riley offense, very vanilla pro style, small wrinkles here and there. But Nebraska's offense is probably one of the kryptonites, is this very high misdirection, trying to get them, making them think, get them out of position as much as it can. So it remains to be seen how well they do. I think my reasons for optimism is, number one, this is actually a really young O-line.
No question. It's a young team across the board, and the offensive line is completely a microcosm of that, no doubt.
And they've only been average, really, this whole time. And if we actually look at the improvement that a senior-laden offensive line did last year under Greg Austin, the offensive line coach, that gives me hope that he's going to every game. So especially in this non-conference, I think we have one more non-conference game coming up. So if they can get approved from this week to the next, and then the Ohio State game, if it's a lot better by the time, that can make a big difference. Now I think they're going to start unleashing some of the younger guys that are, 4.2, 4.3, 40 guys. 4.2, that may be an exaggeration, but you know what I'm saying. This isn't
your 40 time we're talking about here.
Yeah, 4.2 and about 20 yards. But either way, the other thing is that this is a really different transition now that than the that this coaching staff had with UCF. UCF had no expectations going in. They went 7-6. The next year they were like, yeah, maybe we'll do 7-6 again, do a little bit better, 9-3, whatever it is, and they go 12-0, 13-0, whatever the final one was. Now when they go to Nebraska, no, there was expectations that maybe they go 7-6 after a 4-8 season. No, 4-8 season. Well, but they got Adrian Martinez, so everybody's thinking they're going 10-2, 9-3, 8-4. Well, they stumble against Colorado, which, I thought that could be one of the games that we lose. It's on the road. It's against an opponent that's not untalented, and I think the thing is that as this program progresses, it's a completely different challenge because hey, they had expectations this year. They wanted to win, and I appreciate that. At the same time, how are they handling? Are they still coming back week to week? There's still a lot to play for. They could lose this game and the next game and still be in the hunt for the Big Ten West.
Sure, look at Northwestern last year. Awful out of the gates. Ended up playing in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
The whole Central Florida conversation is really interesting to me. You obviously look for as much objective evidence as you can when forecasting anything, right? You do it in business. I work in marketing. We do it there too. We look at what's happened in the past and try to make our best educated guess as to what's going to happen in the future. But to your point, Blake, Central Florida, completely different set of circumstances, completely different set of variables. And I don't know how many times I heard year one at Central Florida making that comparison in Nebraska. Now year two at Central Florida making that comparison to what's going on in Lincoln. And that never has sat very comfortably with me. And I think you're starting to see that expectations from the fan base and from the media and from those of us who spend way too much time and energy talking and thinking about these things was based off that baseline a little bit. I don't know how realistic that was, and I think we're starting to see that a little bit. I'd much rather have it be this way than the other way around. People care. They want to win. They want to beat a team like Colorado, an old Big 12 foe. And that might be the most disappointing thing about this past weekend for me, is that we're not going to remember or talk about as much, and we should, how Nebraska fans completely took over that stadium. I heard anywhere between 60 and 70%. And there were tons of other fans who didn't even have a ticket, but literally took over that city. That's because people care. And I know people from outside of Nebraska might not get that, but that's something that's pretty unique in the national sports landscape. And it was shown again. And I think that needs to at least be brought up and remembered. Some good news. You play Colorado again a few years from now, 2023 and 2024. Folks around your neck of the woods, Blake, will be looking forward to that. And you better get used to these Huskies, too. Obviously beat the Huskers in Lincoln back in 2017. They play off and on every other year for what'll have ended up being over a half decade. Play again this year, and then Huskers have Northern Illinois again in 21 and 23. So get used to Northern Illinois. Going to be seeing a lot of them. The next matchup again this Saturday, 7 o'clock in Lincoln. That one is on Fox Sports 1, and a chance for Nebraska to turn the tides heading into Big Ten play.
Okay, Phil, let's close the casket, bury this game, move on. What do you got for Minnesota this week? They're our number 3 team in the power rankings.
Yeah. Well, if anyone listening or watching stayed up and watched that game in its entirety on Saturday, kudos to you. A 9:30 Central kickoff in what we talked about last week, I think might be one of the most underratedly difficult places to play in the country, especially with as competitive as Fresno State has been the past couple of years. You're defending Mountain West Conference champion. It was a hot night. It was a night where Minnesota had to travel and, adjust its body clock a little bit. Just a feisty, Minnesota definitely didn't play its best game, but just refused to back down and refused to go away despite, some of those circumstances. It's a very PJ Fleck-ish victory where you might play down to the competition a little bit. Some of your weaknesses show, but if PJ Fleck is one thing, we all know persistent might be an understatement. Very feisty, continues to put himself out there and that program out there and really try to drive things forward that way. You talk about a team kind of embodying its coach sometimes. I think that feistiness really showed for the Gophers. It was an entertaining one for those who stayed up. One guy you have to mention, I don't think we've talked about him yet on this program, but Antoine Winfield Jr. Obviously, you know that name if you're an NFL history buff. His dad was a Pro Bowl NFL player. Antoine Winfield played for the Vikings for a lot of years, and their family has some roots in the Twin Cities now. Winfield Jr. has had a really interesting career. At one point, you remember during some of the tumult a couple years ago, some sexual assault allegations levied against I think it was about 10 members of the team, and Antoine was one of them. At one point was going to leave the school, was part of a lawsuit against the school for suspending him after he was basically vilified or vindicated rather of any charges. It's just a weird situation. That all seems almost like ancient history now, making big plays. Had a couple big plays in the opener against South Dakota State, was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week, made the game-sealing interception in overtime to beat Fresno State. So a cool story, a cool year for him so far, and the Gophers have been, I think, maybe what we expected. I think most Minnesota fans are probably hoping they'd have a little bit better showing against both the teams they've played so far, but they're finding ways to win, and that's not something you've always been able to say about the U of M, at least in recent years. PJ Fleck seems to be trying to turn that around a little bit.
Yeah, I think Minnesota, really, I just like the way they run their offense. I like the way their defense plays. Again, they need to get a little bit more talented on the defensive side of the ball, I think. The offense, I think, has plenty. Tanner Morgan had a pretty good game, hit a lot of good open zones. The team wants to play man-to-man against them. I'm a little worried, though, that he might not have enough time to throw the ball. So we'll see how it goes for the rest of for this weekend. Anytime it's a triple option team like Georgia Southern, you never know. I mean, look at Army against Michigan, and Army did the same thing to Oklahoma last year.
Yep.
So
it's a tough defense to play against.
Yeah,
especially
don't freak
when you're
out
not
too
used
much.
to it. So, yeah, you try to get through that one unscathed. Then Minnesota has an off week, then plays Purdue to open conference play on the 28th of September. We'll really find out really what both of those teams are made of in that matchup. But this Saturday, 2:30 p.m. Central on BTN against Georgia Southern with that vaunted triple option offense. So that's number 3 on the list. We're down to our last couple. I think it's pretty easy to say who's looked the most stout for through 2 games, but behind Wisconsin, Iowa has showed out very, very well, especially against Rutgers this past weekend. Blake, what did you see out of the Hawkeyes against, as you said? I was texting you the other day, like, the bottom of this conference is just bad with Rutgers and, 1 or 2 other teams. It's just tough, and it pains me. Rutgers, obviously, the kind of the birthplace of college football in some ways. There is some ancient tradition there. It's a bummer that they're not able to figure things out there on the East Coast. But in any case, Iowa looked great against them, and this is more about what Iowa did than what Rutgers maybe wasn't able to do, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to tell. Like you said, Rutgers is terrible. It's hard to tell how good Iowa really is.
Sure.
Again, I do. I mean, in a lot of ways, I like that they stick to their guns. They play stretch right, stretch left, play action pass, maybe a little power here and there. Some straight drop back passes, a little bit of shotgun mixed in. Nothing too fancy. But this week, Cy-Hawk rivalry.
Throw everything out the window, right?
Yeah, throw everything out the window. Man, it seems like the last, 3, 4, 5 years, this game has been close no matter how bad either team is or how much better the other team's supposed to be. It's been a lot closer. They have kind of opposing styles. Iowa State's more of a spread it out team, but they kind of have an Ohio State feel where they're going to try and hit you hard out of the spread, whereas Iowa, of course, is more of a pro style hit you hard power run team. little play action here and there. More of a pro style offense from the offensive side, and then the defenses both are very multiple, very well disciplined, very well coached. So I mean, it will be a tough game for me to pick this week, but we'll see how that goes. And anything can happen in these rivalry games.
Yeah, it's been fun between those two teams, I'd say, over the course of the past decade more often than not. ESPN College Game Day going to be in Ames, Iowa at Jack Trice Stadium for the first time ever.
Hey, and I've heard that
one,
it's
so that
got
should
some of
be
the
a lot of
best
fun.
tailgate.
I have heard that too. I'd love to go to a game down there sometime. Obviously, drive through Ames on the way back to Omaha when we make it down, and you see the exit.
Maybe we'll meet
Jack
there
Trice
halfway.
and, yeah, maybe go see what Matt Campbell's program is all about one of these days. That'd be fantastic. So that will be a fun one this weekend as well. I failed to copy over the broadcast information for that game, so maybe I'll look that up quick while we start talking about the last team on our list, and that is the Wisconsin Badgers. Like we said earlier, Wisconsin has outscored Southern Florida and Central Michigan by a combined score of 110-0. Look great on offense, look great on defense. Again, a case of what type of opponents have they seen. And look, a lot can change. You're always an injury or a misfortune away from your season getting turned on its head. So we don't really want to ever make any sweeping generalizations either way. But kudos to Paul Chryst Group. They look absolutely just on fire coming out of the gates. I think, as we said going into this year, I think they're pretty pissed off about going 8-5 last year. After they started the season ranked 4th in the country, they've come out with a vengeance, and would expect to continue to see that as they get into some tougher opponents. 3 p.m. Central on Fox Sports 1 for Iowa and Iowa State this weekend. So keep an eye out for that one as well. But yeah, talking about Wisconsin, they continue to cruise, Blake.
Oh yeah, they're just no daylight defense, like we talked about last week. I don't care who you're playing. Anytime you, especially in this day and age in college football, anytime you shut somebody out,
it's really hard to do.
At 60, I think, or at 55 points, and they scored 61 this week. I mean, that's insane.
They got you the over single-handedly.
Yeah, and I was a little worried. I'm like, geez, it's like, are they going to be able to make it? But it's hard to tell how good they are, but at the same time, you can really recognize the talent when you look at Quintus Cephas, who's come back from his ordeal as well, is a really good wide receiver. He's going to make a difference. It's almost kind of like that they have the old K-State scheduling model going right now.
It wouldn't be a show without you making some reference to Kansas State and Bill Snyder teams of yesteryear.
You know, we had Colorado, Nebraska had Colorado last week, and they were hater rivalry for
the nostalgia. Yeah, you just can't get away from it. I hear you.
K-State was probably growing up my most hated rivalry because they sucked for so many years, and then they finally get good for a few years in the 1990s, and they think that Nebraska's done, and then we go on to basically beat them every year for, after once Callahan left, essentially. But that's neither here nor there. That's what they kind of have this K-State schedule, this week schedule going right now. So it's hard to tell how good but this could be just, hey, iron out the kinks now, get to Big Ten play, and it could just keep them healthy the rest of the year. They don't have to. It doesn't look like Jonathan Taylor is taking very many hits.
No, that's good, and that's what the great teams do, right? They don't have any control over who's on their schedule. Those decisions were made years ago. All they can do is come out and like we talked about at the top, put their foot on somebody's throat and look the best you possibly can. Blow teams that you're that much better than out of the water. That's what the good teams do. That's what the great teams do. When you see more of a middling program like Minnesota struggle against a South Dakota State and then compare that the same weekend to Wisconsin going down to South Florida, shutting them out. Again, it's not a perfect barometer, but it's all we have to this point, and what it tells us is that Wisconsin's going to be a very difficult out for the rest of this division moving forward. I picked Nebraska to win the division off the top of the season. I don't necessarily want to jump ship that early. I think there's a lot of overreaction in Huskerland right now. But I know you, Blake, are really starting to lean Wisconsin, as you talked about last week, and it's hard to blame anybody after 2 weeks. But that's what's fun about this, right? It's kind of like when you start a new job, the first couple months, you drink from a fire hose and you learn a lot, but you still don't know nearly as much as you're going to a year in, 2 years in. And there's still, this thing's just getting started, and it's going to be really, really exciting to see how it shakes out for the rest of the year. Sounds like on the quarterback side for Wisconsin, that had been a little bit of a toss-up coming into the year. Jack Cohn won the job, looked really good for what it's worth against Central Michigan with over 360 passing yards. But sounds like Graham Mertz is actually going to redshirt, so it's kind of Cohn's show to run, barring any kind of unforeseen circumstances. And circle your calendars for 2 weeks from Saturday right now. Michigan, Wisconsin, I think, is going to be appointment viewing on the 21st. As of now, that's a 10 versus 14 matchup in terms of national AP rankings. So should be a lot of fun. And again, that's your put up or shut up time, right? That's the time where we're really going to know if the Badgers are for real, or if what we've seen so far is more a product of the competition than just how improved they are from last year.
Yeah, we'll see. Again, right now, the reason why they're my pick to win, I obviously hoped for Nebraska to be better, and I wanted them to be it. But I just think that Wisconsin, it's the defense. They seem to just reload. It seems like they have a lot more depth than the rest of the conference, than the rest of the Big Ten West. And then it looks like they have at least 2 NFL players. I think Quintus Cephas is going to be an NFL player. Pryor might be as well. He's a little bit more questionable. He's a little small. And Jonathan Taylor. And Jonathan Taylor looks like he could be the next coming of like a Saquon Barkley, only bigger.
Yeah, and at least 1 or 2 Wisconsin offensive linemen are going to get graded out very highly by the Pro Football Focuses of the world by the end of the year. And you'll probably see, one of those 2 big boys up front start to attract some NFL attention too. Wisconsin is off this weekend, so they get a chance to heal up heading into that Michigan game as well. We'll talk more about that one next week. So that's our power rankings. Let's get into this week's stories of the week. Blake, I'm sure you saw, I'm sure a lot of our listeners saw, ESPN put together a panel of 150 media members to vote for on the top 150 college teams of all time. Obviously, 150 years of college football being celebrated this year. You've seen the patches on the jerseys. Some teams, including Nebraska, they're starting to look like NASCAR drivers. You've got the 150 years patch, the Big Ten, the Adidas, your team insignia. But a cool. I believe they call that a sesquicentennial. If I'm not mistaken.
Say what?
Yeah, God bless you. But in any case, ESPN put this list together, and there were 5 Big Ten West schools who made the top 150 college teams of all time. 4 of them were near Nebraska Cornhuskers, 3 of which we had the privilege of seeing when we were growing up. So kind of cool to reminisce, look at the history of it a little bit. Number 127 on the list, as everybody, especially our age, expected and really would have been disappointed if we hadn't seen the 1904 Minnesota Gophers football team with all the history and tradition of that program. You can obviously sense my sarcasm. At the same time, what people forget is Minnesota, back before like the 70s and 80s when the program took a downturn, they were awesome. Lots of good history. You've got Bronco Nagurski, Bobby Brown, some real, great names. And obviously 1904, that even predates those guys by quite a bit. We're talking the turn of the century here. I was actually at a work conference at the University of Minnesota earlier this week and had a chance to walk around campus a little bit and look through some of their archives. And there's a great history and tradition at that program. So it gets you thinking a little bit. They've built a new athletes village. They're trying to get their facilities on par with the rest of the conference. You've got a coach like PJ Fleck who as a polarizing figure, to say the least. We could probably do an entire episode just on what we think of him, and maybe we should and could do that at some point. But in any case, for the Gophers to draw on that history and tradition and maybe start making a run at it here and again, it could only be good for the league. Then you jump way up to the top 25 on that list, and there's 4 Cornhusker teams, 3 from the mid-90s, as we said. 24, the 1997 Nebraska team. Number 15 on the list, 1994 Nebraska.
Tommy Frazier.
Yep, that 97 team was quarterbacked by Scott Frost. Technically shared a championship with Michigan. Still would have loved to have seen what could have happened if those two teams had played that year. Charles Woodson against Scott Frost would have been just an absolutely awesome matchup. So it's a shame it took college football as long as it has to figure out how to make those types of matchups happen.
Didn't it happen the next week or the next year? I think that was the last year.
Well, yeah, and they moved to the BCS after that, which obviously had its own kind of imperfections as well. In any case, 94 Nebraska, definitely my favorite team. The 94 national.
That Florida game.
Sure. The 94 national championship game against Miami is the first college football game I remember watching when Nebraska came back against the Hurricanes and kind of put the first iteration of the It's All About the U dynasty to a close. I'll never forget that image of Warren Sapp sucking wind on the sideline after the pipeline from Big Red pushed him and his mates all over the field. But then, 95 Nebraska. I still think it's the best team of all time. I was surprised to see it ranked number 4, and the 1971 Huskers ranked number 1. Obviously, a very good season, beating Oklahoma in the game of the century and winning the second of back-to-back national championships in 71. But that 95 Nebraska team, obviously, one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant seasons in college football history. And they were deep. You look at a couple of their first games, they had Lawrence Phillips and all of his kind of off the field issues was suspended, then allowed to come back. They were down to their 4th and 5th string running back in a couple of those games and still boat raced Arizona State and a couple other teams. So,
not to mention that other running back you're talking about was Amon Green.
A guy named Amon Green, who ended up having a pretty decent career in his own right. So just a wealth of talent. So kind of just a cool thing ESPN did. And maybe the other piece of it that is surprising is that the other schools in the Big Ten West, for all the success they've maybe had in recent years, didn't make that list. So ways to go for some of those other programs, but always love to dig back into the archives and the history a little bit. I'm hoping we can do some more of that, during the off season and maybe some of the times where, we're looking for things to talk about. It's obviously easy right now and we're in the thick of the season, but there's a lot of history in this division, and to touch on some of that, obviously outside of just Huskerland too. Always cool to dig into. What's your story of the week, Blake?
My story is an individual by the name of Isaiah Bowser. He's a running back at Northwestern. He's their top running back, although he did get hurt in the Stanford game, so they're hoping that he'll be able to come back this week. This guy has overcome a ton of things. He came from middle nowhere, Ohio. His mom was a single mom, and she left him alone when he was 23 months old with her boyfriend so that she could go run an errand. And it was him and his sister, and because he was doing something naughty for a 23-month-old, he poured boiling water over his hands. The man went to jail for it. He's got scars on his hands still to this day because and people would always say something about his hands while he was growing up, so he always kind of felt like an outcast. He lived with his grandparents while his mom worked many jobs and raised three children as a single mother. Then he started loving football. He started playing really well. It was starting as a freshman at this little town in Ohio, and then he tears his ACL his sophomore year. He rehabbed and went to the YMCA every day, and he would work grass. He would go do a lawn service with his grandpa every day to make money, and then go rehab. And he was in the YMCA every day for the rest of his basically high school career. led this Ohio high school to their first and second only playoff berths, and they won actually a couple games. And he only was rated like a 2-star out of high school. Didn't get much offers, and they didn't think much of it. They didn't know, hey, what he was going to do when he got to Northwestern. Injuries piled up. He stepped up, became a 1,000-yard rusher. Pretty amazing story. Cheers, hats off to Isaiah Bowser. Pretty awesome to see what sports can do for a person. I mean, without football, without some of these sports, who knows where he could have gone? He could have let it lead him astray. So that's one of the things that I really like about football, is because it's kind of like a battlefield, and it's an analogy for battling through life.
Yeah, absolutely. And credit to Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald for the program, and he's in an environment he's built there too. That's the type of place where a story like Bowser, guy who's maybe fallen through the cracks through no fault of his own, can really thrive and be successful. And the Fighting Fitzes seem to have a knack for finding guys like that. So a cool story, and hope to see him back on the field here soon, and to see more chapters of that story penned. That's going to do it for us this week. Really appreciate everybody joining us. We've seen our audience grow a little bit through the first couple weeks of this, and just want to express our appreciation for all of our friends and those who have kind of picked this thing up. Let us know, give us feedback, comment on Facebook, hit us up on Twitter. You can email us at simplythewestpodcast@gmail.com. Always looking for info and feedback. We will post these power rankings online as well, so you can keep up to date with those throughout the rest of the season if you're so inclined. And be sure to hit us up on Facebook. Blake's going to be posting his against the spread picks every week.
Or over under. I kind of pick, because if I can't decide which one to go with.
You're leaving yourself an out. That's called hedging. We call that
hedging. Yeah, I might even add the money line in. Hey, if it's betting, I'm trying to make money here. It doesn't matter. I need to. Maybe I'll.
Are you actually putting money down on
a parlay one week? You know.
Are you actually putting money down on each of the picks that you post?
I decline to answer.
You're pleading the fifth because your wife might watch this?
Yeah.
Smart. I can edit that out if you want me to, so I don't get you in trouble.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, like I said, check us out. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud. We do have a website, simplythewest.wixsite.com/simplythewest. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy another beautiful weekend of football, and we'll talk to you next week.